Exodus chapter 5. Hey, which do you think is more painful? To live without hope or to catch a glimpse of hope only to have it be snatched away and have it disappear? If we expect our deliverance to be about comfort, we're probably going to be disappointed. Deliverance comes about only through pain and difficulty, hardship. We're going to look at this. The message is called Going from Bad to Worse. And what we're going to discover is that as God was preparing the Hebrews to be delivered from the Egyptian slavery, it wasn't just smooth as spreading melted butter on the toast you had this morning. It was difficult. It was hard. And we're going to talk about what that's about. Maybe you've come to God with a life of sin. It was a mess with sin. And you were relieved to find that God accepts you in Christ just as you are. But as time goes on, you realize that those sins from your former life have a deeper hold on you than what you imagined. And a lot of Christians, because that deeper hold that sin has on them, they think, well, maybe I wasn't saved. I'm still struggling with this sin. That temptation's still there. It still seems to have power over me. Maybe you found that after years of harboring the pain of some abuse in secret, you realize it's time to talk about it. Time to tell the truth to God and some trusted individual. But the prospect of reliving that painful experience creates even greater pain. It hurts too much to talk about it. I'm not going to go there. Maybe you've made painful secrets known before and the people you talked to didn't help, told you to quit feeling that way, or they hurt you or blamed you for how you were feeling. You've probably developed various ways of dealing with what's been done to you. Self-protection, hypersensitivity, exaggerating to gain attention, not trusting anybody, maybe getting even. In delivering you, God wants to show you that your previous manner of life has been enslaving, that it actually was leading you to death. He wants you to walk in freedom. However, many people have discovered that the path to freedom is not an easy path. Some have discovered how painful that deliverance can be. The pain of reliving an experience or the continued power of that certain temptation. The grip of sin does not loosen easily. Some have taken their victimhood as an identity and they've carried that with them. And so when we talk about deliverance and being free of some painful experience from the past, it's like giving up my identity. What are you talking about? For some, their sin has been a source of refuge and comfort. And when life gets tough, they go back to that sin because that's where the comfort is. God calls us to abandon everything that we've depended on. Everything that we've clung to. Our sin or our victim mentality. And He calls us to the light. But how many like it when it's dark outside and you've been sleeping, that maybe your parents or your spouse turned the light on? How would you describe that experience? What's it like when you come out of a cave into the bright sunlight? It hurts, doesn't it? Painful is what really, our eyes get so used to the dark that when the light comes on, it hurts to adjust. And that describes the pattern for a lot of people. And so when we talk about deliverance, some have swerved near that, and then it started to hurt, and so they pull back. They pull away. Today I want to look at Moses showing up at Pharaoh and how that went. Over the last weeks, we've talked about the burning bush, and God calls Moses to go, and he offers up the excuses. And finally Moses goes. Last week, God's will, God's way. And he heads back and he's ready to go and he's fired up. And so Chapter 5, verse 1, he and Aaron march right into Pharaoh's presence. Let's look at 5 and verse 1. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went in, and they told Pharaoh, "Thus says the God of Israel, let my people go that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." And the Pharaoh says, "Sure, not a problem. Have at it." Not exactly. The glory of an Egyptian king, the Pharaoh, would have been displayed by the towering architecture, the large cities that they would have been building. They would have built huge walls and then public buildings and homes all within the confines of that city. And they would have made them out of bricks. One Pharaoh's pyramids, their tombs, if you will, one of those pyramids contains 24 million bricks. Now, a skilled brick worker working at top speed could make about 3,000 bricks in a day. But rarely were they in top physical condition since they were slaves. Standing over them, of course, was a taskmaster demanding the highest level of performance. An ancient inscription said this: "The rod is in my hand, do not be idle." That was the mentality of the taskmasters. A description was written that went something like this: "He is dirtier than vines or pigs from treading under his mud. His clothes are stiff with clay. His leather belt is going to ruin. He is miserable. His sides ache since he must be outside in a treacherous wind. His arms are destroyed with technical work. What he eats is the bread of his fingers, and he washes himself only once a season. He is simply wretched through and through." There's the condition of the slaves. And at the burning bush, God said, "I've heard their plight. I've heard their cry, and I long to deliver them, Moses. Let's partner up." No wonder the people enthusiastically responded. Look at chapter 4, verse 29. Then Moses and Aaron went, and they gathered all the elders of the children of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. Then he did the signs in the sight of the people. So the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel and that he looked at their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. After all those years of slavery, deliverance is in sight. God has responded. God heard our prayers. Decades of praying and crying out. He really is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's heard our prayers. He's keeping his promise. And Moses is going, and he's going to give him the business, and he's going to tell him and demand our release, and God's going to come through, and we're all going to be out of here. But that's not how the Pharaoh heard things. You see, the Pharaoh thought he was God. He thought he was to be worshipped, and he determined when those people got up and when they went to sleep. And he determined their daily schedule, and he determined their rations for them. He determined whether they were safe or not. And here comes somebody making a demand in the name of some other god. So no wonder in chapter 5 and verse 2, the Pharaoh says, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." If you notice the word Lord, there's in all capitals. And we've spoken over the last weeks that when it's in all capitals, that is translated from the word Jehovah or Yahweh, God's proper name. I am Jehovah is how he would have described himself. So Pharaoh is saying, who is this God that I should be listening to him? What's his name? I don't recognize that name. That's not a name that I've ever heard of before. Look down at verse 6. So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And you shall lay on them the quota of bricks which they made before. You shall not reduce it, for they're idle. Therefore they are crying out, saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.'" Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words. He demands more productivity out of them, not more bricks, but now it was harder. They're going to have to go get their own straw, which would have been used to hold the mud together. They have too much free time on their hands. Back when our kids were young, our daughters, there would be arguing now and then. And so we decided that if they had time to argue, they had time to do some other things that weren't so pleasant. So we have a gravel driveway, and weeds tend to grow in the gravel. And here we had two little girls with time on their hands. And we had a driveway with some grass growing in the spaces there. And you would have driven by our house a couple of times. You would have seen two little girls glaring at one another, blaming the other person. And then you would have come by later, and there would have been less weeds in the driveway than you remembered. We'd say, hey, if you have time for this, then you have time to go do that. And really 2 or 3 times of that, and it cured them. It had a healing effect, if you will. That's what the Pharaoh's thinking. You people have all this time. You want to go off to worship, and we don't have time for that around here. Make it even more productive. Make it even harder. If we look around at our circumstances and we base the work of God on our present circumstances, then it would be possible for us to look around and say, God's abandoned us. God's let us down. Where's God at in all of this? How many people have been blindsided by some hard circumstance, and then they're like, God's let us down? In Hebrews 11 and verse 1, it says there that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That faith is based on substance and evidence. And so these Hebrews were faced with a choice that you and I get faced with on a regular basis. Are we going to believe what God says about Himself in His Word? Or are we going to believe our circumstances when we look around us? Because faith is based on evidence. Where am I going to put my faith? What do you do when your own hopes are dashed? When your faith is challenged because of some disappointing turn of events? How do you feel? Do you cry out to God for rescue? Do you continue to trust His promise of deliverance? Here's what a lot of us do. We make a deal with God and we hold up a picture and we say, I will trust you, God, as long as my deliverance looks like this. And what we have are like beaches, palm trees, a hammock. And we say, God, if you can make my deliverance look like that, I'm yours. I'm in. Let's do this thing, God. I can trust you as long as it looks like that. But Exodus chapter 5 teaches us that it doesn't always really look like that. And those of you that have sought deliverance from a destructive habit in your life, understand that it's not palm trees and hammocks trying to get rid of that destructive habit in your life. And those of you that have been wounded and hurt by someone else's negligence and carelessness, you know that getting over the hurt and dealing with the pain of that and the shame of that, that doesn't just happen with hammocks and palm trees and beaches. And so what a lot of us do is we wander in search of comfort and refuge somewhere else. For many, we go back to our sin because the sin in the moment provides us some temporary relief, and we think the long-term agony is a long ways off. And maybe I'll get to miss out on it. Maybe it won't be for me. Maybe I'll be the exception to it. And people go back to the very things that enslave them. Why? Because it hurts getting rid of that. Ask anybody that's been deep into addiction. When they begin to detox and get some of that out of their system. And the shakes and the headaches and sometimes medical treatment is required because it's so deep down into us. And God says, here's this short-term pain for long-term gain. Trust me with the process. As long as we're saying, God, save me like this, we're not trusting God. We're demanding things of Him. Only when we start saying, God, save me any way you like, you're always good. You always love me. Save me how you think best. I will trust you. I know you're good. What was really happening there was this clash of gods. And the Hebrew people were faced with a decision. We can stay with the God who gives us temporary comfort, but ultimate misery, or we can put our faith in the true God who longs for us to have freedom. Which will we do? Now the Hebrews get to the breaking point. Verse 20. Then as they came after Pharaoh, or they came out from Pharaoh, the leaders of the people met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. And they said to them, let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us. Think of how convoluted this is. The Pharaoh has enslaved them for 4 centuries. And he just demanded that they now get their own straw and must maintain the same quota. And they walk out of that meeting and blame Moses for it. Behind their resentment of Moses and Aaron was really a resentment of God. God, look where you've put us. Look where you brought us. This isn't where I thought it would be. I thought it was going to be hammocks and palm trees here. In verse 21 is the word abhorrent. We are abhorrent in their sight. Some of your translations may have closer to the original word, which is stink. We stink to them. We stink to them. And Moses takes the blame for resentment that's really aimed at God, for getting them into that fix. Let me just make a little parenthesis here for a moment. You'd be surprised how many times pastors get blamed for problems going on in individual lives because they're outside the home, because it's easier to blame him than it is the spouse. And he's visible and we can't see God to blame him. So we'll put it all right there. Close parenthesis. Now, when faced with the dilemma here of either trusting God, and God brings freedom, or appeasing Pharaoh, which was going to produce continuing misery, what are the people choosing? How fascinating human nature. That it's our tendency to appease the sin, to appease the pain, rather than deal with it. Because it hurts too much to deal with it. I don't want to talk about it. No, thank you. I often picture people with deep pain in their life as the pain is pounding on the door from the basement and they're just up against it. And they're holding the door shut and the door's bulging and they're holding the door shut. And if I open that door, it's going to be my worst nightmare come true. I'm scared of what's behind the door. It'll hurt too bad to talk about it. And when we open the door and we begin to talk to God about it and admit it to God, this has happened and this hurts and this makes me angry and this is painful. And then we talk to a trusted individual or two about it and we bring it out into the light. It's not as bad. It doesn't hurt as bad. How many people continue in bad habits because it hurts too much to stop? How many people continue in pain because of some abuse, because they think it's going to hurt too much to talk it through? Think of this now. The people are viewing God as the enemy and Pharaoh as their ally. How many people have viewed a bottle as their ally? How many people have viewed a victim mentality as their ally? How many people have hung on to this ally that's producing only misery in their lives? Because they think the path to freedom is going to hurt too much. Even Moses staggered. Look at verse 22. So Moses returned to the Lord and he said, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? Since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all. A couple of things I marked in my Bible. The word why is in there 2 times. I think that there's a reason that why and wine sound alike. Because when we're saying, why, God, why would you do this? Why would this happen? And your kids are at the house going, why do I have to do this? And why do I have to do that? There's a similarity to whining there, isn't it? He not only is asking this why question a couple of times, Moses starts saying, God, you haven't come through for your people. You haven't come through. Now, how many think God was surprised that the Pharaoh didn't just deliver the palm trees and the hammock and such? God wasn't surprised by that. He told Moses that Pharaoh wouldn't let him go right away, that he'd have to be compelled by God's mighty hand. Pharaoh's hard heart did not thwart God's plan. It wasn't thrown off. Let me give you a sneak peek to next Sunday's message, Standing on the Promises, verse 1. The Lord, chapter 6, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of the land. Look at verse 7. Verse 6 first. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and a great judgments. And then here's our memory verse for this week in your series notebooks. I will take you as my people and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. This is what I'm going to do. But so often we hang on to our sin and we hang on to our victim mentality because that feels easier. It's so what we're used to. And God's saying, I've got freedom in store. I've got freedom for you. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 13, talks there about even if we lose our faith, God remains faithful. He can't deny himself. That's who he is. That's what his character is. He can't deny himself even if we bail just a little bit. Can you think of a time in your life when you said why to God? Let me show you for a moment a time in Jesus' life when he said why to God. It's Matthew 27, verse 46. He said there, was about the 9th hour, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, on crucifixion day. Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Raw emotion. He didn't hold it in. He's teaching us something here. He's not teaching us to pretend everything's okay. It's all just great. He's quoting from Psalm 22. And Psalm 22, again, helps fuel us, feed us in our pain. Verse 1 of Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? And from the words of my groaning, where are you, God? Oh, my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear. And in the night season, and I'm not silent, but you are, God. Where are you? You ever been there? I think Jesus teaches us to take it to God. But it goes on, the next couple of verses. But you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not ashamed. Jesus' cry from the cross teaches us to cling to who God is and what He has done in the past. He's not done working. Cling to who God is. He's holy and enthroned. Look at what He's done. He delivered our fathers. He's worked in the past. He's going to work in the present. And to live the words of Jesus and to live out this psalm is to cry out to God when it's hard and it's difficult. And we're trying to release the clutches of that sin. Jesus cried in the desolation before the cross, Father, if it's possible, would you let this cup pass from me? And the religious crowd sneered and mocked Jesus. He saved others. Let Him save Himself. Come down off of there. If all we do is measure the trustworthiness of God by our present circumstances, we'll fold every time and run back to the refuge of our sin. This doesn't match my picture. So we think God's forsaken us. He's abandoned us. And then some well-meaning person will say, well, if you just would have had more faith, you could have gotten out of that. That's your problem. You need more faith. Somebody else comes along and says, well, if you just learn your lesson, God would end that thing. Just tell God you've learned your lesson. Jesus experienced the worst pain, abandonment by God. And He cried out, my God, my God. And that short-term pain brought long-term deliverance because it meant resurrection for Him, and it means resurrection life for us as well. Jesus faced the worst, and we don't have to. Let's take our pain to Him and find our hope in Him and take it far beyond our present circumstances, because most likely that sin is so deeply embedded in your heart that it's going to hurt when it comes out. And that wounding from someone else is so deep into your heart, that's not going to come out easily. And on this side of heaven, we don't arrive at ultimate comfort and refuge. There's still pain and there's still danger, and God remains faithful. If your anguish is from a slavery to an addiction, it may get worse before it gets better. But that doesn't mean God is absent. It means look how deeply the clutches of that sin were into your life. And look how strongly He wants to show Himself on your behalf. It means that those bands of that sin were tied so tightly, they're not going to come off without some blood. But a couple of scriptures from Romans to end today. Romans chapter 8 and verse 13. If we live according to the flesh, we will die. But if by the Spirit, and you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. Is there anybody that thinks this putting to death process is going to be palm trees and hammocks. No, it's putting it to death. It's not going to happen easily. One more in Romans 6 and verse 8. If we died with Christ, we believe that we shall live with him. It's what's on the other side of that. What's on the other side for the Hebrews? Promised land. Based on who God is and how he's worked in the past. What's on the other side for us? Freedom. Abundant life. No more guilt. No more regret. No more pain. But it's trusting God in the process. Would you bow your heads with me, please?